Нека да аплодираме Лука Вигано.
So, hello everyone. I hope you were here this morning for the talks of my colleagues, because I'm going to reference them a little bit in my talk. And this is a bit improvised, but I hope you'll forgive me if I try to make references. And actually, in Steve's talk this morning, he told us the way nature transmits information. How do we humans transmit information? We transmit information through stories. We are storytellers. Not just the three of us, like Stephen was saying this morning, but we as a species, as animals, we are storytellers. And fairy tales and myths are among the best ways that we have invented to transmit information. And they are so good that they actually work also for cybersecurity. This is what I'm going to tell you about in my talk. This is the takeaway message. Fairy tales and cybersecurity go actually really well together. So let me start with a question. What is the earliest fairy tale that you remember? Your favorite fairy tale? And you're welcome to shout titles in English, please, because my Bulgarian is non-existent. But any suggestions, any ideas? Snow White? Max and Moritz are here. Cinderella? Perfect. Sorry, I'm old and deaf, and I can't understand that, but I assume it is a wonderful fairy tale. And the good news, and it's probably one of these, right? So, and I'm going to use pictures from Disney films because that's the easiest way to communicate that we have. You know, we have Cinderella, we have Sleeping Beauty, we have Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, we have Snow White, Puss in Boots, and Little Red Riding Hood. And there are many, many more. The interesting thing is that all of these fairy tales on the slide, and all the ones that you mentioned, at least the ones that I could hear, they contain, either explicitly or more likely implicitly, some cybersecurity element. Okay? Now, obviously, I'm not talking about the big bad wolf sending a text message to Little Red Riding Hood and stuff like that. You know, there is not much technology, but the ideas, they are already contained in the fairy tales. So, let me explain why I'm interested in these things. That is me. You can see me, I work, as Petko said in his introduction, I hope, I work in cybersecurity. But I actually like to put the cyber in parentheses, because we should actually speak of information security. So the way in which we protect information, the way in which we protect data. The fact that we do it online, the fact that we do it in the cyberspace, is an accident, is because this is the world we live in. But we have actually been dealing with security for centuries, ever since we had some information to protect. So I will speak of cybersecurity because that is the word that is mostly used today, but I will also generally speak about security or information security. I'm a computer scientist, so I work in software engineering, so how to build software systems that work, hopefully. But I also have been working in AI and logic. Now, not necessarily the kind of AI that is hype today, you know, large language models, ChatGPT and the like, even though I have worked a little bit in that area. I've been mainly working in automated reasoning. And I will give you an example later on of how we can actually use AI to reason about security. Okay. And also, to some extent, how we need to reason about the security of AI. But there is a final bullet there, and that are the arts. I'm very, very interested in the arts. I think Petko said that I'm a scenarist, if that is the Bulgarian word for it. So I write plays, I write screenplays as well. And over the last few years, I've been trying to combine my interest in the arts with my interest in cybersecurity. And why is that important? Well, in a nutshell, it is important because security, cybersecurity, is difficult. I mean, you just need to open the newspaper to listen to the news, and almost on a daily basis, there is some report about a security incident in one country, in the other country, maybe your health system. A couple of days ago, I worked for King's College London. King's College London has a number of hospitals. They were attacked with a ransomware attack. The data was encrypted, and King's had either to pay, which we didn't do, or to wipe out a number of computers. So cybersecurity is difficult to achieve. It's also difficult to teach. I teach cybersecurity, and it's not that easy. You need a lot of background. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that here today. So, there is no test at the end of the talk. But it's also difficult to explain. Okay? That is the main reason why I'm interested in the synergy between cybersecurity and the arts. Security is difficult to explain. So we need to find a way to make it easier to explain. And why is that important? Well, because there are fundamentally two problems that we need to tackle. The first problem is that users, lay people, many of you, I would imagine, if not all of us, actually are the cause of cyber attacks. So IBM a few years ago did a study, and the study concluded that 95% of all successful cyber attacks are due to human error. Okay? Humans fuck up. Apologies. But that's what we do, right? And that is because we are ignorant, in the right sense of the word, right? We don't know enough. I mean, I'm a security expert, so hopefully I'm not the cause, even though, sometimes I wonder if I might have created some issues. But, many of you here, rightfully, are not cybersecurity experts. You are ignorant, like I'm ignorant of astrogeology or of life below the ocean. And that is fine. In some cases, we are stressed. And where is Stephen? Sebastian. Sebastian was talking about stress. Well, in many cases, you need to log in on your bank, and you need to do a transfer, and it's late, and you don't want to miss the deadline, and you type in your password, and you do a mistake, you're stressed, you create a problem. Okay? Sometimes we believe we know things that we don't, and we are overconfident. No matter what, we are often the cause of mistakes. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you ask the system whose fault it is really, the system or the security expert will tell you it's the fault of the human. If you ask the human will tell you, actually, it's not my fault, it's a technical glitch. I didn't know, I didn't really understand. Nobody explained things to me. And you know what? They're both right. It is a human error, but it is also, in many cases, because we, experts, did not explain things to humans. We expect them to know, but why should you all suddenly become a cybersecurity expert? So the other problem that we need to tackle is that we security experts, we don't really understand users. Okay? So what we do, and I told you, I work on formal analysis of security systems, and I'll give you an example later on. What we typically do, we divide the world in two. We focus on the attacker, the devil there, okay? And we actually try to model the attacker and try to think, what can an attacker do? How would they attack the system? Maybe it's a coalition of attackers and so on. And all the rest, the systems, but also the users, we model them as angelic entities. We call them honest agents. So what do we mean with an honest agent? An agent, so a human or a machine, that is going to behave exactly like the programmers intended them to behave. But that is a mistake. Now, humans are very rarely attackers. I mean, there are a number of hackers, but these are super experts. They know a lot more than I do. Otherwise, standard users are not attackers, but standard users are also not honest agents, because in some cases, they don't even know what the experts intended them to do. I'm old enough to remember the first phones. Okay? When you bought a phone, a mobile phone, you got a phone that was this thick with a manual that was this thick. Okay, nobody read the manual, but at least you had it. These days, you get a phone that is very, very thin, and there is no manual. And the expectation is, well, obviously, it's so easy to understand that even a child can do it. Well, maybe a child because they're digitally native, but not necessarily humans. So we need to tackle that. I like to call these two problems that we need to tackle. The first one, I like to call it human learning, in contraposition to machine learning. So, you might have read in the news about the fact that machines need to learn in order to make decisions. Great, there are a number of my colleagues who work on that. But we also need to make sure that humans learn. Humans understand cybersecurity. The second problem, I like to call learning humans, because we security experts need to learn how humans actually behave for real. Not in our imaginary abstract world, but for real. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both problems. And let me start with the first one, human learning. How can we make sure that humans learn, understand cybersecurity? Well, it won't help if I now started giving a lecture, right? Because you don't have the background. And that's fine. This is not why we are here. And the majority of the people don't have a technical background, and again, that is totally fine. In order to reach humans, we need to change the narrative, and we need to change the language. And this is what I'm going to do with the help of fairy tales. So let me first of all tell you something. We live in a bad world. Okay? Out there, it's a bad world. Sebastian was telling us that in space, everything wants to kill you. Well, on the internet, everything wants to attack you. Okay? So we live in what we call zero trust security, or this should be our stance, right? So we should never trust and always verify. We should not give privileges to people who don't deserve them, and we should always assume that there is a breach. Why is that important? Well, because imagine that you're logging in on your bank account, somebody might be wanting to steal your money, and you need to prevent them from doing so. Who of you has been to London? Okay, few people. So if you've been to London, you have probably used the public transport system. The public transport system is managed by a company called Transport for London. And about a year ago, in May 2023, this was the webpage of Transport for London. Now, you get a prepaid card that is called an Oyster. Okay, you can load money on it, and you just touch it in and out, and when you enter on the tube or on the bus, and then you use it to travel. And I understand you have something similar here, although there are differences. Now, about a year ago, Transport for London moved to a new authentication system. Authentication is when you prove your identity. I prove that I'm indeed Luca Vigano. Okay? And I've highlighted here a few things, the important things. Let me get closer, because even with the glasses, I can't read anymore. So, an even more secure way to sign in. Okay, they haven't really explained what it is, but this is a good start. To strengthen the existing security measures for your account, we're introducing multi-factor authentication, in parentheses MFA, from Tuesday, 16th of May, 2023. While the upgrade is taking place, you will not be able to access your Oyster or contactless account or contact Oyster and contactless customer services. Now, when I read this, and there are similar web pages by banks and everything, when they move to multi-factor authentication, I was a bit puzzled. First of all, there is absolutely no explanation about what multi-factor authentication is, and there is even an acronym, MFA, which scares a lot of people. Second, it says, well, wait a moment, you will not be able to use your system for a while, and this might create a lot of panic in people. So there are quite some strong assumptions that are made here, that you understand what multi-factor authentication is, and that you tolerate the fact that the system is not going to be accessible. And I thought, is there a better way to explain that? And the answer is yes. First of all, what is multi-factor authentication so that we're all on the same page? Well, it's a way, it's a process with which you prove your identity, you authenticate yourself by a number of factors, multi-factors, many factors. A typical factor is your password. You type in your username and your password. That is something that you know. But there are also factors that are based on something that you are, biometrics, your fingerprint, your retina scan, and so on. And there are also factors based on something that you have. Your mobile phone, for instance, you receive a message, a text message on your mobile phone, and you have to type in the number that you received. Multi-factor authentication means you're going to authenticate yourself by 2 or more of these factors. Okay, that is the technical explanation. But let me give you another explanation. And let me use Cinderella. Somebody said Cinderella earlier on. So Cinderella is a very, very interesting fairy tale. It is a universal tale. There are about 700 variants of Cinderella in the world. And actually, this picture that I stole from the web is incomplete because it seems to assume that there is no Cinderella in Southern America or in Australia. And actually, there are versions of Cinderella in Southern America and Australia as well. It is present in every culture with variants, variations, but they're all more or less the same. Now, to make a long story short, I assume you all know more or less what it is, but the story is Cinderella's mother has died. Her father marries again a woman who has 2 other daughters from a previous marriage. The Cinderella's stepmother is, however, very evil and treats her basically like a slave. And the stepsisters are also very evil. The father disappears. It's not important anymore. He goes on a business trip and everything. It's typical of fairy tales. And so Cinderella literally lives in the ashes. Cinderella is actually the girl who lives in the ashes. In German, it would be Aschenputtel. So the girl who lives in the ashes. In Italian, it's Cenerentola, again, ashes, and so on. Cendrillon in French. Okay, she lives in the ashes, is treated like a slave. The king gives a ball. And the objective of the ball is for the prince to find his wife. So every maiden, every girl who is not yet married is invited to the ball. And of course, the stepsisters are very, very keen to go to the ball. Cinderella would like to go as well, but the stepmother doesn't allow her because she is too dirty and everything. She doesn't go. The mother and the sisters go, but by some magic, depending on which version of the story you read, Cinderella actually manages to go to the ball, dances all night with the prince who falls in love with her at first sight, but at midnight the magic expires, and so she needs to run away. By running away, she loses one of her slippers, which is a glass slipper or a gold slipper or a fur slipper, depending on the version of the story. So the prince is desperate. He wants to marry this mysterious girl. He doesn't know the name. The only thing he knows, the only thing he has to identify her is the shoe. So if you have seen Disney's version, this is a screenshot from Disney's version. You don't bother reading it. I'll summarize it. It basically says, soldiers will be going around the realm, and they will have every maiden in the realm try out the shoe. And the one whose foot fits into the shoe is going to be the new princess, because she is the mysterious girl. Now, I was probably a nerd already when I was a kid, but I remember I was very disturbed by this because I thought, how can it be that there is just one girl in the whole realm whose feet fit into the shoe? I mean, what is it? Probably a 37, 38 or something? There should be a lot of people out there. But hey, it's a fairy tale, so we should accept that there is only one girl whose feet are probably so small to fit into the shoe, or actually some variants of the fairy tale are a bit cleverer than others, and they say, no, no, the shoe is magical, and it recognizes the owner and therefore changes shape. But okay, let's assume there is just one girl in the realm whose foot fits into the shoe. So what happens? Well, the soldiers, and this is an excerpt from a movie by Georges Méliès. It's a silent movie, so don't worry, there is no sound. It's one of the first movies ever made, 1912, long movies. And basically, the soldiers go around town and have every girl try it out. But the feet are all too big. So the soldiers are desperate. And this is when they realize authentication, so the identification of Cinderella, is going to fail. We are not able to identify the girl. But the stepmother, who is evil, she has an idea. She wants one of her daughters to actually marry the prince. But the feet are too big. Well, if the feet are too big, what do? You make them smaller. And indeed, in this version of Cinderella, this is the musical Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim, which is actually faithful to the version by the brothers Grimm. What the stepmother does is what you will see here.
The stepmother took matters and Florinda's foot into her own hands.
Careful, my toe!
Darling, I know!
What'll we do?
It'll have to go, but when you're his bride, you can sit or ride. You'll never need to walk!
Now the shoe fits.
Minus one toe,
But
Florinda mounted the prince's horse,
there is some
unaware
blood.
of the blood dripping from the slipper.
So let me stop it here. There is some blood. So what has happened? Cinderella's stepmother has mounted an attack. She has mounted an impersonation attack where she tries one of her daughters to impersonate the mysterious girl, Cinderella. Fortunately, one of the soldiers, one of the aides of the prince, notices some blood, so basically notices the attack. There is a monitor checking the system and finds out that there is an attack and stops it. Okay. So authentication, single authentication is dangerous because it can be attacked. So what about multi-factor authentication? Let's go back to Méliès, and this is what happens, right? So finally, they decide to have Cinderella try out the shoe. And they enter the house where Cinderella is living. You see her there in a second. There she is. She is knitting something, and they have her try out the shoe. Takes a little bit. They bring the shoe. She sits down. She tries it, and it fits. And they're all really, really happy. But wait a moment. Could it be an attack? No, it can't be an attack because she has the other shoe. So she doesn't have just one authentication factor, the size of her foot. She also has the second authentication factor. She possesses the other shoe. So Cinderella is an example of multi-factor authentication. And why is that important? Well, it is important because a single factor can be attacked, as we have seen. But also, it can be that one of the factors fails. For instance, this is what happens in Disney's version.
Madam, my orders were every maiden.
So, this is the stepmother. This is Cinderella. You might recognize her. I think we have all seen this movie. And here comes the glass slipper, but it's made of glass. So the stepmother mounts an attack and destroys one of the factors, which is a little bit like your password is too simple and people can guess it, right? So he is desperate, but this is where multi-factor authentication saves the day. Because if one of the factors doesn't work, then you can use the other factor, namely the fact that you have the shoe to recover from the attack. So Cinderella is indeed a perfect example of multi-factor authentication. And if you're interested, I've been writing about these things, and there is a table of cybersecurity notions and different fairy tales and everything. And I can tell you more. So I think nobody mentioned this, but The Wolf and the Seven Young Goats is another example of multi-factor authentication based on biometrics. Mother goat needs to go to the village for shopping. Father is not present, almost never present in fairy tales. The 7 children stay at home, and Mother Goat tells them, don't open the door unless you hear the sweet sound of my voice and see my white paws. So the big bad wolf, who is hungry, what does he do? Well, he eats some butter to soften his voice. He puts some flour on his hands, on his paws, to make them white. And therefore, the kids think it is the mother. Again, an impersonation attack. They open the door. He eats 6 of them, but the 7th one saves the day. So multi-factor authentication and authentication is present as part of our fairy tale folklore, but we can go back in time even more. Homer's Odyssey. When Ulysses returns home after 20 years, so 10 years at the Siege of Troy, and by the way, Siege of Troy, the eponymous Trojan horse, so how much more cybersecurity can you get than the eponymous Trojan horse? But close parenthesis. When he returns home, 10 years at the Siege of Troy and 10 years going around the Mediterranean, he's an old man. Nobody recognizes him, except his dog Argo recognizes him by his smell, authentication factor number 1. His old nurse recognizes him by a scar on his foot that he procured during a boar hunting accident when he was a kid, authentication factor number 2. So something that you are, your smell, something that you have, a scar. Third, Penelope, Telemachus, and Penelope's suitors recognize him by the fact that he is the only one able to bend old Ulysses' bow and shoot an arrow through the head of 12 axes, authentication factor number 3, something that you are able to do. And there are a number of other authentication factors out there. But I find it fascinating that, we struggle to understand multi-factor authentication because we are using computers and everything. But we have been using multi-factor authentication for thousands of years. And if we realize that, if people realize that, if you here now realize that, maybe the world out there on the internet will be slightly less scary. Let me give you examples. We even make jokes about it. This is an excerpt from a movie called Monsters vs. Aliens. And I told you a number of factors, something that you are, something that you have, something that you know, something that you're able to do. Here they suggest a number of other factors. Now, I don't know if your butt cheeks are unique, but maybe yes. Okay. So, zero trust security, it's a bad and scary world out there. It's a world that tries to kill you. But, oops, sorry, too quick. But we should always be careful because every single one could be the big bad wolf pretending to be our grandmother, like in Little Red Riding Hood. So never trust anybody, always verify, always assume that there has been a breach. Okay. Let me give you another example before I move on to the second part of the talk. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Okay, it's a gold mine for cybersecurity. I don't know if you know the story, so I'll try to summarize this. It's actually one of the longest fairy tales out there. It's 40 pages, so it's almost a short novel rather than a fairy tale. So, oh, and also the timer stopped, so it means I can go on and talk and talk and talk and talk, right? Cool. So, okay, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Ali Baba is a poor woodcutter. So he is really, really poor. He goes to the woods and cuts some wood to actually bring home some wood to sell so that he can feed his family. One day, as he does so, he overhears the sound of some horses. So he hides on top of a tree, and he sees 40 thieves arriving on horseback and stopping in front of a rock and saying the magic word, the password, "Open sesame." And the rock opens, the thieves disappear inside, they get out, they say "close sesame," the password to close it, and they run away. Good. So what has happened? Ali Baba has overheard, eavesdropped a password. So Ali Baba is now a potential attacker. And what he's going to do is he's curious. He goes in front of the rock and says, "Open sesame," and he enters in the cave, and the cave is full of treasures. But he's a good guy. He's just very, very poor. So what he does is he takes a small bag of gold. Just a very, very small bag of gold to feed his family. Okay. So he goes home, feeds his family. But Ali Baba has a brother. And the brother is called Qasim. And Qasim is very evil, is very, very greedy. And he finds out that Ali Baba has found some gold coins. So he coerces, would be the technical term, Ali Baba into revealing how and where he found that bag of gold. This is, by the way, important. There are elections, right? Here in Italy, in other countries, not in the UK because we're not part of the European Union anymore. Great, fantastic choice. But we will have elections in a month. And coercion in voting is a problem where people force others to vote. Qasim is greedy. He goes to the cave with 2 donkeys because he wants to take as much gold as he can. He goes to the cave, says, "Open sesame." The door opens. He goes inside. The door closes. He starts filling up bags and bags and bags of gold, but in his greed, he forgets the password. And this is something we have all experienced. And I'm not going to believe if one of you says, "I've never forgotten a password," because you're absolutely lying. Everybody has forgotten a password once in their lives and many times. So he forgets the password. He is trapped into the cave. The thieves come back and they kill him. Okay. So he forgets a password. Now, days pass. The thieves are happy. They've found the thief and killed him. But Ali Baba is worried about his brother. His brother is not coming home. So what he does is he goes to the cave, finds the body of his brother, takes him home to give him a proper burial. But in this way, and we were talking about transmission of information, in this way, the thieves now know that there must be 2 people, at least, who know the password. One, the thief Qasim that they have killed, and the other one, whoever took the body. So the thieves decide to send one of them to the village to identify who actually stole their money. And to make a long story short, 40 pages, I told you I'm condensing them, what the thief does is he finds out where Ali Baba lives, and he marks the door with a cross, with a chalk, so that when they can come back at night with all the other 39 thieves, they're going to enter the house and kill everybody inside. Fairy tales are very gruesome, by the way. But there is a slave girl called Morgiana, or Morgiana, depending on how you want to pronounce her, who was a slave of Qasim and is now living with Ali Baba and his family, who actually sees the thief putting a cross on the door. So what she does, and I hope you can see it in the slide, she puts a cross on every other door. Why is that important? Because this is the way you create anonymity. You're not anonymous by yourself online, but you're anonymous if everybody else is doing the same thing. If I were to turn around and close my eyes and somebody threw a paper plane or a rock, don't throw a rock at me, but if somebody did it and I opened my eyes, it could have been every single one of you, right? Because I don't have enough information to determine who it was. And that's exactly what she's doing. She is preventing the thieves from accessing that information. And there is a lot more. So I'll stop here with fairy tales because you just are going to enjoy the pleasure of reading them with this new way of thinking about them. And I'm always very, very open to suggestions. So you can find my email on the webpage and everything. If you have some obscure fairy tale or non-obscure fairy tale, do please send me an email. I have a huge database that I've been collecting. But I'm a scientist. So does it work? Because I know anecdotally that it works, but does it work for real? So what we did, together with some colleagues of mine who are also psychologists and social scientists, we carried out some experiments. We carried out some experiments asking people questions about cybersecurity, recording the answers. Then when we made them watch an excerpt from a movie, fairy tale or not fairy tale, and then we asked them the same question again. And what we found out is that it almost always works. So in many cases, fairy tales, films, theater, music can really improve people's understanding of cybersecurity. In some cases, and anonymity is one example, it's not enough to just see a movie clip. You need somebody like me. You need a mediator bridging the gap. But still, with a mediator, it works. So to summarize this first part of the talk, I've been using existing artworks, fairy tales, but I've also been creating new artworks on purpose, because there are some properties, some notions that are not explained or that are difficult to explain in fairy tales. After all, fairy tales don't talk about computers and laptops and everything. So for existing artworks, they can help reduce the risks because they can help explain cybersecurity. But also, as was mentioned earlier on, I'm a playwright, I'm a screenplay writer. I wrote the script of a short movie that you can find online, free, called The First, which is basically about the inverse Turing test. So in a world where AI is around us, where robots are around us, and it's difficult to distinguish humans and robots, what would happen if there are certain jobs that are forbidden to humans? Like flying a plane, because it is too dangerous. Okay? You would want an AI to do it. But what would happen if you were a young girl and the dream of your life is to become a pilot? So could a human pretend to be a computer, a robot? Could a human convince a robot that she, the human, is a robot? And if this sounds familiar, it's because you have seen Blade Runner and because Philip Dick already wrote everything ages ago. But this is another take on the story. Okay. Now, we spoke about human learning, and this gives you an idea. I have a few more minutes, and I'm going to tell you about the work that I've been doing on learning humans. Namely, how can we make sure that we don't just see the world in black and white, but we see the shades of gray. And as an example, I've been focusing, together with some colleagues, on what we call security ceremonies. Now, a security protocol is it's a program with which machines exchange messages. You know, your computer sends a message to the bank sends a message back, and so on, until you can enter into the system. A security ceremony is a protocol where we say explicitly, no, there is a human as well. You know, it's not my laptop sending a message to the bank, but it's me typing on my laptop sending a message to the bank. And that makes a difference. That is exactly the difference between black and white. That is exactly the difference between devil and angels. We are somewhere in between. We make mistakes. Now, I asked earlier on who of you has been to London. There were a number of hands raised, and I mentioned the Oyster card. Now, if you take the tube in London, you have this Oyster card, the underground. Tube is the fancy British word for underground, or metro, depending on how you want to call it. You touch in at the gate, you travel, and when you want to exit, you touch out again. Basically, we can represent this, and I'm getting slightly technical, forgive me for that. We can represent this as this exchange of messages between a human, a gate in when you enter the system, and a gate out. And you can use your Oyster card or you can use your credit card. It doesn't matter. Okay? Great. Now, I understand, I haven't had the time to use it because our hosts have been driving me around all the time these last few days, but I understand that if you have a similar card here in Sofia, but you only touch in, you don't touch out. Well, if you come to London, It will be a very natural mistake for you to make that you just touch in. And maybe when you exit, the gates are open, because sometimes they're open, you just walk out. If you do that, you're going to pay about £20. Because the system will think that you have done the longest possible trip and will charge you £20. Okay? Because you're charged by the length of the trip, not by the amount of trips that you make. So it is a mistake, it is a vulnerability, and why is it a vulnerability? Well, have a look at your wallet, you're losing £20. So it is an attack on your wallet. So what we did is we started thinking, okay, how can we model that? How can we model human behavior? And one way to do that is to see these messages that are being passed on like jigsaw puzzle pieces. So you have the human doing some things, the gate doing some things, and they fit together, right? But with a variant. It is a jigsaw piece that is really, really, really difficult. Think about a painting by Monet, or the water lilies, or one of these abstract paintings. You have no instructions, you have no idea, you just have the pieces and you need to compose them. So what are you going to do? You're going to try. And as you try, you do mistakes. For instance, you might, instead of following that path that was intended, that the protocol designers intended you to do, you might attach a piece sooner than planned. This, by the way, is a mutation. So it's a mutation of the original path. It's exactly what Steve was talking on this morning about evolution. We humans are good at evolution. We are the product of evolution. So what we did is we mutated these sets of messages, these sets of actions that you need to do, and thought, what would happen if you actually do something sooner? And why is that important? Well, because if you come to London, you will see posters like this that tell you, be careful, always touch in and out. Okay? If you forget one of them, you're going to be fined. Another possible mutation is actually to do something more. You do an additional step. Why is that important? Well, because people have found out that when it is rush hour and there are a lot of people, instead of taking out the Oyster card from your wallet, people took out the wallet and touched the wallet on the reader. But the reader reads every single card that is in there. So if you have a Oyster card and a credit card, it will read both and it will charge both. And indeed, you will see posters like this, avoid card clash. Now, what we then did is we came up with a tool that we call X-Men, human mutations. I mean, it's a terrible pun, I know, but that is how we called it. And we actually generate these human mutations. We generate variants of the ceremony so that we can analyze it. So we generate a variant on one side, but we also generate the variant on the other side through X-Men. You see the X, the yellow X, like the X-Men of Professor X. And then we propagate them so that we can find attacks. And did we find attacks? You bet we did. We found all of these attacks that occur on TFL, which were known, but we found more. We also found a number of other attacks, let me skip this, in a protocol that is called single sign-on. And I'm going to abuse my power and steal a couple of minutes, if I can. I mean, I'm here, it's difficult to kick me out. So I'm going to stay for a couple of minutes. Single sign-on is a protocol that allows you to log in once, and then it opens a number of logs. For instance, online, you will be asked often, you can log in by typing in your username or your password, or you can log in by Google. You type in on your Google account, you log in on Google, and suddenly you access the other page as well. This is a protocol where basically you have a client, in this case could be a doctor, an identity provider, which could be the hospital. The doctor types in password and username, so username and password on the hospital, and this gives the doctor access to a number of other services provided by so-called service providers. Okay. Now, how does it work? It works by building what is called an authentication assertion, which is a document that needs to be signed. Okay? So basically, the hospital, Google, needs to sign a document saying, I certify that this is the doctor who wants to access the service provider, let them in. By our mutations, we considered what would happen, and it happens for real, by the way, what would happen if actually the document that was signed is just a document that says, this is the doctor, signed the hospital, signed the identity provider. And I can give you an example of that. Are you familiar with the Three Musketeers? At some point in the Three Musketeers, Richelieu, who is trying to subvert the king, enrolls Milady, who is a spy. And so I shall need something of you in writing a carte blanche. And this is, by the way, halfway through the story, and a lot of things happen. The Three Musketeers plus D'Artagnan save the day, and Milady is executed, spoiler, sorry, but, you know, for treason. But Richelieu accuses the Three Musketeers plus D'Artagnan of treason. But the following happens. This is Richelieu and this is the king. Got it, and now they can use it. And that is exactly the attack that we did on single sign-on. So if you forget to say who this document is for, and you just sign a document saying, this is the doctor, signed the hospital, whoever has the document can go and pretend to be the doctor. Okay? And this is what we did. We did it for real, by the way. Google was selling this, and we mounted the attack, and we told Google there is an attack, and they told us it's not possible, and we told them, no, we did it for real because we attacked ourselves, and then they said, ooh, maybe you're right, and so on. So it was interesting. So this is what we can do if we model humans, if we learn the way humans behave, because it is natural to sign something shorter than intended and carry out an attack. So we can do human learning, we can do learning humans. Let me conclude by mentioning the future. Well, actually the present, quantum computing. You might have heard of that. What is quantum computing? Basically, it's computing assuming that we don't have bits, which are 0 and 1, but we have qubits. And qubits can live in a large number of states. Basically, they can live in that sphere. So it's not 0 and 1 on a plane, but it's anywhere in that sphere. And why is that important? Because it gives us a huge amount of computing power that we don't yet have today. So quantum computers don't exist yet, but we are more or less on the verge of having something that is feasible, that is working. And if it works, we can say goodbye to encryption as we know it today. Because every single encryption algorithm that we are using today is safe with current computers, but not safe with quantum computers. So myself and a number of colleagues are working on what is called post-quantum cryptography, namely assuming that quantum computers exist, people are going to take the data that we have encrypted today and in 10 years or whatever, decrypt it. Can we actually build an encryption system that resists that? And the answer is maybe. We don't know yet. But we're also working on quantum cryptography, because if quantum computers exist, then maybe we can come up with new encryption algorithms that run on quantum computers that are safe against quantum computers. So the future is interesting, especially for people who have a career in cybersecurity, because we have work to do for the next 50 years at least. And I'll stop here.